What's going on, everyone? This is John. I'm here with Charlie. Talk about some Penn State football, maybe even throwing some basketball at the end. I'll have some thoughts there, but mostly here about football for Charlie and I on the Penn State Roundtable podcast. We'll get things started right off the bat here, Charlie. Penn State finally won their first game of the year in the Big Ten. Now, am I gonna throw a party for it? Probably not, but it was good to see them kind of bounce back here. 28-10 win against Michigan State. If you can kind of just walk us through that, what were your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean the final score is not indicative of how the game really went for Penn State. It was pretty close up to that third quarter, but Nittany Lions is riding Katron Allen, 25 carries for 181 yards, a real workhorse day for Allen. Even Singleton got some love in there too with 15 carries, but it's clear that they obviously still don't trust the quarterback Grunkmeyer. Only 13 attempts, but still get the win. Like you said, John, a monkey off the back with the first Big Ten win of the season. And I'm sure that they don't care how they got the win. They're just happy they got it.
Yeah, it was, like I said, nobody's going to throw a party over this win, but it did seem like a lot of the guys in the locker room and interim head coach Terry Smith, they were pretty happy to get the win. Not just for Smith and his first ever win as, Penn State's head coach, so to say, but more so just the fact like, hey, we've been working hard all year. We've kind of had some tough bounces here and there. The one thing about Penn State, and even though, like you said, it was a pretty close game, it felt like your typical Penn State game, even when they're as good as they are. They always usually beat teams who are worse than them, and I think that's why they got rid of Franklin, which we'll obviously speak about next. But this year, when you lose to Northwestern and UCLA, like those are two games Penn State typically doesn't lose. Now, on the flip side of that, they might not beat them by 40 points, but they're usually going to sneak out a win. And it almost felt like that's kind of what they did here. I know they scored 14 in the fourth quarter, but it was really a pretty close game for the most part. So, it was what it was. It's a good win. It's a nice step in the right direction. I do think there's probably even some frustration as you kind of watch them throughout certain games because, like, the defense looked pretty good again. I think it was like almost 5 sacks in the game. And it was kind of just like a lot of guys who you expected to do what they haven't been doing all year. So that's always frustrating. But more importantly, Charlie, and I guess what will be most of our talk today is James Franklin going to Virginia Tech. So curious to kind of hear your initial thoughts and, what it might mean for Tech or what it might mean for Penn State and Franklin.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is massive for Virginia Tech because they've just been kind of in college football purgatory for the last, 10, 15 years. I mean, honestly, we can go back to the Michael Vick days. It's the last time they were really, really super relevant in terms of college football. And I think Franklin, at minimum, is going to bring relevance back to Virginia Tech. I mean, they're definitely going to get an uptick in recruitment and good players coming through the program. And I just think it's a real good match after Franklin, The reason why he's out at Penn State is because he couldn't win those big games, and those big games aren't going to be as so what I'm looking for. They're not going to be as daunting as they were at Penn State, where you're not going to be going to Oregon or Ohio State to prove yourself. You're going to be in the ACC proving yourself, and that's definitely a whole different beast than what he was dealing with at Penn State.
Yeah, that's kind of my similar thoughts on him taking that job in terms of the ACC. You kind of look at the ACC, right, and it's definitely not what it once was. Clemson is pretty bad right now, to put things as frank as possible. I do think Florida State is going to end up, going a different direction with Norvell, and they'll be in a better spot. But even to say that it's been as good as it should be down in Florida is obviously not the case. Virginia is the 19th ranked team in the country, Charlie, and I've watched Virginia a few times, and I have not been impressed with Virginia once. So I think that's kind of shows you how bad the ACC, what spot they're in. Miami has this, typical Miami choke job that they like to show every year and can't win an ACC title. So you look at the ACC, and obviously it's probably one of the better 4 conferences in the country still, but it's nothing compared to the Big Ten. For Franklin, I think that'll be important. You kind of look at this as maybe, hey, this is kind of your best chance to get back to the college football playoffs. If you have a 1-loss, 2-loss ACC team and they're still in the title game, you'll have a shot to get in, even if you were to lose that game. So I do like it from Tech standpoint. Now for Franklin, I spent a little bit of time pondering about this and what it kind of meant for his career. Now, as you said, Virginia Tech has been pretty brutal. But as you look at Virginia Tech and kind of the history, like, and just the university, there's no reason for a program like Tech to ever be bad. So if they're giving him the right money, and apparently the athletic budget's getting increased by like 240 million over the next 4 years, so that'll obviously be nice. And everybody I've spoken to in the Penn State circles has kind of said, hey, like, Franklin wouldn't have taken this job if he didn't know that they were going to allocate him the money that he needs essentially to build the correct NIL fund and everything. So I get it. I'm not gonna lie, my initial reaction to it was almost like career suicide, because I just don't think Tech is very good. And if Franklin goes there and they're like a 4 to 6 win team every year, it's like, was this guy getting carried by Penn State and like the recruits they could bring because they're Penn State? But I wish him well. I thought he'd go a little bit higher than Virginia Tech, but I guess Florida and Auburn, kind of the two hottest names right now outside of Penn State. And obviously, we know he's not coming back here. Maybe didn't want him. You hear some stuff with Lane Kiffin of Florida. Obviously, if they can get him, that changes things at Ole Miss. But it seemed like Franklin wanted to get ahead of the curve here. A funny part, I guess, too, is Franklin was going to be paid almost $50 million not to coach. And I know part of that was like he had to find a job in coaching or in the media. But you have to be like a real football sicko to say, hey, after like a month and a half being fired, I'm just going to go take this job at Virginia Tech now. So kudos to him. He obviously wants to coach. And, we'll kind of hop into our next statement here, because I was reading earlier, Franklin's like really trying to, poach some guys from Penn State's recruiting class. Obviously, there's not really much left, but there are a good amount of former commits who are still out there. And I believe 6 of them are going to be on campus this weekend for Virginia Tech, if I'm not mistaken. Against Miami. So that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, these guys who have committed to Penn State over the last, the course of the year, of the last few months, or who committed to James Franklin at Penn State are going to be looking around and saying, hey, the guy I want to play for and the guy who talked me into playing for him is now going to be over here. Yeah, of course I want to go take a look. And I also wonder what other coaches are going to be coming over from James Franklin's Penn State staff that will follow into Virginia Tech. Maybe some player evaluators. I don't know if he has like a GM, in mind that he might, snag from the Nittany Lions, but it'll be interesting to see what Franklin's able to do with these guys who he got to buy into him at Penn State and what he's going to do with them over at Virginia Tech.
Yeah, so I was actually reading earlier too, to your point about the coaching staff. Apparently 6 staffers from like Penn State football / the Lash building, which is the Lash building is so regular athletes at Penn State, like non-football players, work out in like Haluba Hall pretty much, and then they have like smaller weight rooms that you go to. They're very nice, but the Lash building is right next to like at least in my time there, it was right next to the academic center for athletes. So like you had to go there for study hall, and then Lash is like right around there. And Lash is like this monster building. There's a turf field outside. On Fridays, when the football team didn't play in State College, like they had an away game, the baseball team would like work out at like 6 a.m. there. And they'd have like smoothies made for us and like food and like steak. But like when we were practicing at like, or like lifting out at other places, you were lucky if you got like some tart juice and a couple Uncrustables. Like that was like the diet. So apparently he's taken 6 people from that Lash building. Now, from what I know and remember, the Lash building is a lot of like essential workers, almost like people who make the food and whatnot, but there's also like academic advisors in certain parts. So I don't know what was taken from there. But it does sound like 6 of those guys are, people are going with him to Tech. Now, Terry Smith spoke about that actually ahead of this Nebraska game. And he said, obviously, it's frustrating to lose 6 people of your staff. But I also think, too, for Penn State fans who might be upset about that, I think it is important to remember, like, Smith obviously isn't going to be the head coach. Whoever comes in is probably going to want to change the entire building, whatever it is, and kind of go from there. So from their respect, you have to almost take the job with Franklin if he's willing to offer it. So can't be too upset. And kind of to your point, too, about, like, guys committing just to Franklin, like, you can't really get mad at high school age kids for decommitting and wanting to follow him. It's just the unfortunate reality of what it is. The Penn State brand is a lot higher regarded than Virginia Tech's. But at the end of the day, like the coaching staff has a lot to do with that. And, considering Franklin isn't there anymore, it's going to happen. We've seen it happen 100 times. And from the sound of things, for these 6 guys or whatever it was that are going over recruit-wise as well, I wouldn't be shocked, if they end up committing to Virginia Tech. But Penn State, obviously, Charlie, you want to our next topic here. To get the recruits that they need, you're going to have to hire a head coach rather soon. Now, I saw, I'll let you go after this point, but I saw some people kind of speaking like, hey, Franklin's hired. I know Virginia and Pennsylvania aren't like, it's not like Virginia Tech and Penn State are a minute from each other, but they're only a couple hours. So the recruiting battles are real, especially with Franklin now, if they are, giving him the money he needs. Okay. And a lot of Penn State fans view this as a problem. They think Penn State's going to lose out on a lot of recruits. So kind of just talk me through what you think that they should do coaching wise, what names you like, and how it maybe impacts recruits.
Yeah, I mean, looking around, you absolutely want to find a guy who's going to be able to, talk high school kids into coming to Penn State and making sure they're a representative of that, kind of legacy Penn State brand. And they kind of stress the importance of what it means to be a Nittany Lion, right? Because there is something to be said about the Penn State football program and the historical value there. But yeah, there's been a number of coaches around college football who have been, linked to the Penn State job and who would probably be good fits. I think you've mentioned Brian Hartline in recent weeks, the Ohio State OC, I believe, who has done a fantastic job developing talent and recruiting. Of course, they've had one of the best receiver rooms consistently year after year of the last, you could say, almost a decade in college football. Another name I like is the Missouri head coach, Eli Drinkwitz. I mean, he's a guy who's done a good job bringing back Missouri over the last 3 years, and he's also got a connection with the former Penn State quarterback, and I believe that's Bo Pribula. And who knows, now that Aller's gone, and he kind of forced Pribula out when Aller decided to come back for an extra year at Penn State, maybe it'd be a nice heartwarming story to bring him back along with the coach that recruited him to Missouri, Drinkwitz, and build a new program there with those two guys and a homegrown quarterback in Bo.
Yeah. So I know we were kind of speaking earlier about the piece done by the York Daily Records, Frank Bodani, and kind of the names he still says are in the search. Drinkwitz, obviously one of them. Hartline, especially one of them. Two names that I'm rather interested in. Now, I'm kind of good off Brent Key at Georgia Tech. I like what Key has done. Don't get me wrong. Like, Tech kind of went from a no-name program to something. But I also think a lot of that is really due to, the quarterback play they'd gotten from King. So without him, I do question. But he did lead offensive line duties under Nick Saban at Alabama. So, he's hard-nosed. He kind of fits that mold. But the two names I like are Kalen DeBoer out of Alabama, and I do like Bob Chesney out of James Madison, which might sound weird to some. My first pick would be DeBoer if you have that chance. My second one would be Hartline, just because of what he's done. But I do think I don't know if Alabama is going to get rid of DeBoer or he's going to want to leave. Hartline, I assume you can poach just because he is an offensive coordinator, so it'll be a step up in a sense. Chesney, I know for a fact, 99% sure that you could get him no matter what. And you kind of look at what he's done throughout his career, and I get it. Like, he's coaching at James Madison, right? We're not going to sit here and say James Madison is anything near Penn State. But he's had some other stops through his career, like up in the Northeast, like Salve Regina, Assumption, Holy Cross. Again, I get it. Like, not even D1 programs, a couple of them. But he's done nothing but win. And there is something to be said about that. Like, overall, he's 129-51. He won 2 NE10 titles, 5 Patriot Leagues, Sun Belt East Division this year. It's like the dude can win football games, and I think there's a lot to be said about that. Now, on the flip side of that, I do believe that Penn State fans are kind of looking for, this hot hire, and Hartline or DeBoer would obviously be that, where Chesney is probably, the one with more to prove. But I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are. Like, do you think Penn State needs a proven guy? Can they go a different direction? Or do you think taking maybe a risk on someone like Chesney would make sense?
Yeah, I don't think they necessarily need to go after a proven guy. I mean, the Chesney pick makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I'm sure people were saying the same thing about Kurt Signetti before he made the jump from JMU to Indiana, and so sometimes taking a swing like that can it can lead to heights you haven't seen before. I mean, we haven't seen an Indiana football program like this in who knows how long, and Chesney could provide the same kind of spark for Penn State, who although they've done a lot of winning over the years, it hasn't been a lot of championship wins or necessarily any college football playoff advancements to the championship. But yeah, I mean the proven guy's always safer. But if you're looking for the boomer bust to maybe take that step that's going to put you all the way over the top, I think Chesney's a pretty enticing, tantalizing option.
Yeah, and I guess to kind of finish out our coaching search stuff here, Charlie. I believe we've spoken about it a little bit, but you and I kind of being like near New York and whatnot, seeing a lot of Jets and Giants stuff. One name that I've seen floated a lot, and I think it could be a good idea, is Brian Daboll. Now, I know Giants fans who are also Penn Staters, and there's a lot of them, probably won't be too excited to see Brian Daboll's name mentioned here. But I mean, the dude's been coaching since like 1997. And he has some college football stops. He was a volunteer assistant at William & Mary to start his career, then a grad assistant at Michigan State. Went to the NFL from 2000 up until 2017, actually, where he was Alabama's offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. And obviously, that Alabama team had all those receivers, and I believe that was Waddle and Devonta Smith and Henry Ruggs, if I'm not mistaken, and Tua and Jalen Hurts. Even it might have been that year or the year before, but obviously one of the better college offenses we've ever seen. Then he goes to Buffalo, and he, I don't want to say helps Josh Allen because Josh Allen is a star in his own right. But 90% of the reason why it seemed like the Giants hired Daboll is because they thought whatever quarterback they eventually get can be like Josh Allen, or he can develop him into that. Now that's kind of why I like Daboll and Hartline, because as you look at Penn State again, and I know you and I have spoken about this, but the defense is always pretty good. Excuse me, you always kind of know what you have with the defense, but the offense is always the question. So if you can bring an offensive focused guy in here, and you can still recruit those defensive guys just off the brand, but now you add an offensive, kind of look ahead too. I think it changes the program. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on Daboll. I don't know if you're a Giants fan or not, but just kind of curious to hear that.
Yeah, no, that's not something I've heard, but it's honestly pretty intriguing. If Daboll's interested in, if he's at the end of the season, no one's really looking for him as an offensive coordinator because he's not going to get another head coaching gig right away. That's just not going to happen after what happened in the Giants in New York. But I mean, making the jump down to college and taking over a program like Penn State, that could be something that's a great landing spot for him. Kind of similar to how Matt Rule, fell into Nebraska's hands after he flamed out in the NFL, but has turned out to be a pretty decent college coach, So yeah. Daboll, like you said, has that experience with Alabama winning national championships, and he obviously knows how to run an offense. So, yeah, I don't hate that at all. I don't think Brian Daboll's a terrible coach, football coach, I should say, and yeah. I think Penn State would be, that's really interesting. I kind of like it.
Yeah, I've so apparently, and I don't get too much into the whole kid stuff because I think it's kind of weird to look at kids of coaches. But apparently one of his sons goes to Penn State. So that's where I think the intrigue is coming from. And according to, I think it was Bruce Feldman of The Athletic, there are people in the Penn State, locker room, whatever you want to say, just the administration who like him a lot. Now, I don't know if that is because he has a son who goes there and whatnot, if that helps at all, if he's been on campus. I know he's, maybe seen at a couple games here and there. But definitely an intriguing name, like you said. But for now, we still have Terry Smith. Sounds like Smith, even if he's not going to get the head coaching job, I don't think. I did hear yesterday some reports or people at practices from reporters saying Smith was walking by and kids are saying, hire Terry, whatever. So, they want him there, it sounds like. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. But I could see a situation where, if Daboll or Brian Hartline or Bob Chesney comes in, or Kalen DeBoer, and he's the GM maybe. I think that'd be a good role for Terry Smith. He's been around Penn State for 30 plus years now. He's a player there. He's been on Franklin's staff for, he was on Franklin's staff for 11 and a half years. It'll be a 12 season full here now. So some intrigue there. But for now, Charlie, he's their head man, interim head coach, and he'll have Nebraska in the second and final game of the year. Look, Nebraska doesn't have Dylan Raiola. They're 4-3, 7-3 overall. They've played better than Penn State has this year, if we're being honest. But I still view Nebraska as a rather beatable team. They did just beat UCLA 28-21 without Dylan. But kind of walk me through what you're thinking ahead of this one.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, by the records, you would think that Nebraska's got better season so far this year. But I mean, I don't know. Penn State, kind of like how we talked about last week with Michigan State, despite their shortcomings, despite their record, they still have this boatload of talent all over the roster, especially on the defense, the running backs. I know the quarterback hasn't been great, but there's just a lot of NFL talent on this Penn State team that I think is enough to power them to a victory over a team like Nebraska, who, like we just talked about with Matt Rule, he's done a pretty good job there. They don't have the quarterback, but overall they've had a pretty solid season. But yeah, I don't know. This seems to me like another possible Penn State Big Ten victory, and just to kind of keep the good vibes rolling into that last game of the season against Rutgers.
Yeah, it's actually funny because like you look at Penn State's season and you're like, well, they shouldn't really be favored by this many points against anyone, but they're 8.5-point favorites against Nebraska. I think last week, if I'm not mistaken, it was like, what do you remember what the line was? I think it was similar.
Just about a touchdown. Yeah, sounds
yeah.
Right.
And Penn State ended up covering it in one, I guess, not easy, but towards the end it was relatively easy. So I think this is somewhat of a telling sign. And again, as you look back, and I know Matt Rule spoke about it. I don't have it up in front of me, but Penn State, although they haven't played the type of football that anybody thought they would at 1-6 in the Big Ten and 4-6 overall, but they're outscoring their opponents by like 93 points, and that's again not telling because you have to win games at the end of the day. But there's probably something to be said about that. Like, you had Oregon pretty much beat at home and you kind of choked that one away. The UCLA game was just an abomination to the program, in my opinion. That was just embarrassing. But you still only lost by 5, and you had a chance to win the game at the end. Northwestern, you lose 2 by 1, just embarrassing. And Iowa, same thing, 1 point, which you can deal with a 1-point loss in Iowa, obviously this year. Most years, obviously not. But outside of Ohio State kind of kicking your butts in the second half, it's like Penn State has been in every single game and even should have beat Indiana, which they lost to by 3 points. So I think kind of to your point is like there's still a lot of talent on this roster, and it's really just about putting it all together. But, obviously, unfortunately, with only 2 games left, you can't really put too much more together at this point in terms of the season. But I do agree. I think Penn State wins this one. I think Nebraska's improved, but a backup quarterback situation at Penn State, I don't know. It's Penn State's last home game for a lot of these kids. I believe they might actually have Thanksgiving break. I'm not sure. But, interesting game nonetheless. I think Penn State comes away with. So we'll see. But outside of that, Charlie, and I know I didn't ask you to look up much about this, or we didn't speak much about this, so I'll speak a little bit about it, just myself. Penn State, though, basketball. Obviously, you never look at Penn State basketball as a team, to be great. And coming into the year, a lot of people actually had them last in the Big Ten. I don't necessarily disagree with that in some sense heading into the year, but they've played pretty well so far at 5-0. They have a big time player in Caden Mingo who has really done what he's had to do. So I do suggest that if you're a football guy or football fan out there watching this, and you're just a Penn Stater, definitely give the basketball program some love this year. Mingo's averaging 17. There's a lot to kind of like for once at Penn State basketball. And, it sounds like they even have a chance to land Mingo's younger brother, Dylan Mingo. He's the number 5 overall player in the country out of Long Island Lutheran in New York. It sounds like from the sound of things, at least, it's between Penn State and UNC. And I've kind of spoken about this a lot at Roundtable Penn State on the UNC side of things more. As everybody knows, I went to Penn State, so I have a lot of respect for everyone there. But if you're a basketball player and you don't go to UNC over Penn State, I'd probably look at you a little crazy. But nonetheless, it'd be pretty cool to get them. So, as unlikely as it might sound in some sense, it does seem like it's a real possibility. I bet his brother's having a pretty big impact on that. So pretty fun nonetheless. And then I guess to kind of close things out here, hockey has done what it's had to do this year too. Just talk about some other Penn State sports for a sec. 10-4 overall, 3-3 in the Big Ten. Obviously, coming into this year, like Penn State hockey was supposed to be, probably the best team in the country, arguably. It was kind of really the year for them to do everything that they wanted to do. A lot of season left. Obviously, Gavin McKenna, that's kind of everybody's guy. Expected first pick next year in the draft. So we'll see. But seems like some things are turning for Penn State here. And, as long as the football gets back on track, I think everybody will be happy with where things head. Obviously, Charlie and I will be here, next Wednesday or next Thursday, and we'll speak some more, hopefully for another Penn State win as we kind of close out the football season. But I'll let everybody go for now, and I appreciate everybody stepping into the Penn State Roundtable podcast. Thanks.